Last time, we followed Sulla from his victory at the Battle of the Colline Gate to his resurrection of the office of dictator. Today, we will delve into the office of dictator and explore how Sulla used its extraordinary powers to shape the Republic going forward. The origins of the office of dictator remain a bit of a mystery to us. The ancient sources describing them are likewise confused. Livy, perhaps Rome's greatest historian, is not quite sure who the first dictator was, nor does he know for certain whether the original title for the office was even dictator. Modern scholarship has assembled all the various and contradictory scraps of evidence to give us this patchy reconstruction of the first dictator. He was appointed at some point in either 501 or 498 BCE during the Latin War. His name was either Lartius, Martius, or Largus. He was most likely of consular rank. Beyond this little, we cannot say much. That's because the office of dictator had all but gone extinct by the First Punic War in 264 BCE, before the date of our earliest Roman histories. Therefore, no extant Roman historians had any personal experience with any dictators. Likewise, when Sulla resurrected the office in late 82, no Roman alive had any experience with it either. Historically, the appointment of a dictator was always meant as a temporary solution and only as a last resort in times of great emergency. If there was a civil disturbance that might affect a military outcome, for example, a dictator might be appointed to force said outcome, stabilize the republic, and then return the system back to its normal function. In this way, the dictator served as a substitute for one of the ordinary magistrates. Perhaps the best way to think of dictator in this regard was like a superpowered consul, unanswerable to a colleague, and only with a very temporary superpower. Sulla's re-establishment of the dictatorship would not resemble the institution of old. Firstly, there were no consuls left to appoint a dictator. Next, while one might argue that the entirety of the Civil War was in and of itself a political emergency requiring a dictator to set things right, the war was now over, and therefore the emergency was now past. Given these two insurmountable issues, how, exactly, did Sulla plan to re-establish the office? Some of our ancient sources suggest that Sulla's answer was both novel and actually quite clever. He would demand the Senate to name an interrex. The interrex was an extraordinary magistracy that dated back to Rome's regal period. After the death of a Roman king, an interrex would take temporary command of the state before the ascension of the next king. Hence the meaning of the name, between kings. The custom supposedly dated back to the death of the first Roman king, Romulus. The Senate, finding themselves unable to agree on who should be the next king, decided to break themselves into groups of 10, or decurii. Each decuria would then elect a leader, a decurio. This leader held the title of interrex for a period of 5 days, and governed the city with the same powers that the king once held, while the Senate continued their deliberation. After 5 days, if no king was appointed, the title of interrex would move to the next decurio in order of rank until everyone had held the title, and then the cycle would begin again. The Senate in the time of the Republic also used the office of interrex to elect new consuls in the event that both were killed or were otherwise unable to serve the rest of their 1-year term. Sulla, knowing this, commanded the Senate to name an interrex. This must have been a relief to the senators left alive at the time, thinking that perhaps Sulla intended to name 2 new consuls and then return the system to normalcy. The Senate elected Lucius Valerius Flaccus, a name you might recognize from Part 4 of this series. Unfortunately for all of us, this Flaccus was an older cousin of the one murdered by his troops in Asia. The Romans really did have the most creative names. Flaccus the Elder had consistently advocated for a policy of concordia throughout the various civil wars of Marius and Sulla. Essentially, his aim was to get along with whichever warlord was currently threatening violence, even if it meant tolerating rank illegality. The Senate seemed to prefer Flaccus as interrex because of his advanced age and his consular rank, thinking that he would likely call for new consular elections immediately. But Sulla wrote to him, asking that he propose legislation naming him dictator, which Flaccus promptly did. The language of this law, the Lex Valeria, did not limit Sulla's term as dictator to any fixed amount of time. Rather, it was open-ended, allowing him to do whatever he saw fit to re-establish the normal functions of the Republic. Furthermore, it retroactively made all of Sulla's actions in the Civil War legal, and indemnified him against any further criminal charges in the exercises of his dictatorial power. Essentially, it was a blank check. After proposing this legislation, Flaccus did his duty and called for consular elections for the next year of 81 BCE. But these elections were largely fictitious. Sulla, in his position as dictator, nominated both candidates, Marcus Tullius Decula and Gnaeus Cornelius Dolabella, his former legates. Unsurprisingly, both consuls won their elections. Neither was capable of independent action in light of their debt to Sulla. Therefore, in every way that mattered, Sulla was the ultimate authority at Rome for the foreseeable future. Now that there was nobody left to stand in his way, Sulla set about reforming the Republic. There was no doubt that reform was needed, but how to do it? Sulla set to work at once, ordering the expansion of permanent jury courts for trying public officials. These courts, known as quaestiones perpetuae, were always open and available for any citizen to bring charges against any suspected wrongdoer. Importantly, they were not a new feature of Roman society. These courts were established in 149 BCE and had already undergone major expansions in the 120s. Those expansions seemed to do nothing to prevent the rise of Marius and his civil wars, but who's counting? Sulla also saw to it that these courts were to be staffed by permanent juries of senators. In order to have enough senators to do this, he would need to expand the Senate, and expand it he did. Sulla doubled the number of senators from a pre-Civil War level of about 300 to a new high of 600. In addition, he increased the total number of quaestors from 8 to 20, and included senatorial membership as part of the election to the office. These new senators and quaestors would forever spend their career languishing on juries rather than making any important decisions in the body itself. This had the unintended effect of creating a two-tiered Senate, where some of the senators had real power, and others simply role-played as important decision-makers. Sulla knew that something had to be done about the office of tribune, and the cursus honorum in general. The tribune of the plebs, and their power to introduce radical legislation, had been at the heart of virtually every major outbreak of violence since Marius' sixth consulship. Sulla's answer was to strip the office of all of its special abilities. The tribune of the plebs would never again be allowed to introduce legislation for a vote of the people. Furthermore, once a politician held the office, he was forbidden from running for any higher office thereafter. This made the tribune of the plebs a dead end in terms of a sustained political career. Lastly, he removed the tribune's famed power of veto. No longer would a plebeian tribune have the sole authority to shut down the government if his legislation was not well received. Sulla spent the rest of the year 81 consolidating his changes to the constitution. He codified the cursus honorum into law, forcing the successive holding of offices and making the practice of skipping over offices on the way to the consulship illegal. He also ended the grain dole, likely to try and control the price of grain. This move proved to be quite unpopular, but under Sulla's new constitution, there was little that any individual citizen could do to resist. For the rest of the year, Sulla settled his veterans on land formerly held by the veterans of Marius and Cinna. He also began the arduous process of enfranchising the freed slaves of those killed in his proscriptions, organizing them into their own voting bloc, which he called the Cornelii. For the year 80, Sulla resigned his dictatorship and instead ran for the regular consulship, which he handily won. He spent most of this year continuing the process of political consolidation that he had begun as dictator. Now it seemed he wanted to demonstrate a return to normalcy, so he disbanded his legions and dismissed his lictors, walking around the forum unguarded and giving audiences to regular citizens, as if these moves could make everyone forget about what had just happened. But nobody would forget, and things would never really go back to normal. Join me next time to see how long Sulla's reforms last. I'm Matt Lupu. Thanks for listening.